On the heels of that sobering information, across the Atlantic, with days before a 20% across-the-board tariff rate hits goods from the European Union, EU officials are still trying to negotiate.
We stand ready to negotiate with the United States. Indeed, we have offered 0 for 0 tariffs for industrial goods, as we have successfully done with many other trading partners, because Europe is always ready for a good deal, so we keep it on the table.
But speaking at the White House, U.S. President Trump said that EU's proposal is not enough. Ursula von der Leyen did not rule out retaliation, stressing that countermeasures are being prepared. Well, for more on the impact of this tit-for-tat trade war is having on the global economy, we are joined by Rita McGrath. She's the academic director for executive education at Columbia University's Business School. Rita, I'm so glad to have you on the program. Great to see you.
Nice to be here, Sean.
Well, firstly, I'm interested in your reaction to the international and domestic markets today. Hong Kong down a whopping 13%, and a lot of people wondering, where's the bottom?
Well, we don't know. You know, we, as I think one of your earlier stories reported, we've got really no precedent for anything like this, at least in our lifetimes, or most of our lifetimes. So it's very hard to know when, when will people finally say, okay, this game of chicken has gone on far enough.
Yeah, I think that's the big question. If you look at the White House today, Trump surrounding himself with many of his inner circle, the people that frequently say yes to whatever he says. And once again, Trump digging in his heels, no 90-day reprieve on tariffs. And some believe that he's just posturing for better deals. But there are a lot of people arguing out there that his logic that he's using would not allow Trump to even pass an Econ 101 class, that he really believes tariffs are an economic savior. And I wish I was joking, but this is what people are saying.
Well, I think this really goes back to his experiences as a business person in the 80s. And even back then, he was complaining about the fact that at that time, the Japanese products coming into the United States were considered a really big deal. And Japan was not so great about importing from other places. And I gather a couple of his businesses tried to crack that market and got rejected. And ever since then, it's been a bit of a chip on his shoulder.
He does tend to carry a chip with him, too. History has shown that. Now, China's response, while arguing there are no winners in a trade war, the country's leaders seem to be saying that they're not going to be intimidated. What is the risk to the U.S. consumer at this point?
Well, you'll see price increases on all kinds of things that you didn't probably even know were imported from China. And that they'll show up in bits and pieces of supply chains that are spread all over the globe. It's hard to make stuff in this country for the prices that the Chinese manufacturers can make. So I think you're going to see a lot of impact in just normal retail channels.
Well, let's talk a bit more about that, because people have talked about the Apple products, a lot of technology products that are coming over. But as you said, there are a whole litany of products. And in this global economy, it's not like one thing is made in one country now, too. So it's going to be very difficult to, say, hit something where you can find parts from all over the globe.
Well, that's right. And I think you'll start to see it really weighing in on like textile manufacturers, because a lot of textiles are produced in Asia and then shipped across the ocean, by cars. So I think that's a sector that's going to be very heavily impacted. Anything that's fresh and perishable, you'll start to see price increases there sooner rather than later.
That's tough. Okay, what about the EU? We've heard that it has plans to counter Trump's measures. What could that possibly be, and how frustrating do you think it must be for EU leaders to say, okay, we're willing to go down to 0 tariffs on manufacturing goods? What's your response to that? And basically hearing crickets.
Hearing crickets, exactly. Well, I think the EU is in a particularly bad situation because nobody knows what the right answer is, right? Like, I mean, if you're negotiating with someone, you would at least want to know what their best alternative to a negotiated agreement is and what's yours, right? That's sort of the beginning part of any negotiation. And we just don't have some vital information. I think it's also really important to remember that about 16% of imports for things like the automotive industry come from countries like Germany. It's a huge percentage that's imported.
I just came back from a month in China, and a lot of people over there telling me, look, we understand Trump going after China. The two have had an antagonistic relationship. But what they don't understand is Trump targeting the United States' closest allies, Canada, Mexico, its biggest trading partners, and now the EU. Try to put some rationalization on this for me if you can.
If I could, I would. You know, the simplest explanation is it's sort of because he can, right? And so there are folks in my circles who would say, "Oh, this is just a classic exhibition of power dynamics," and that ultimately the goal would be just to prove that you're very powerful, and that you know, people have to kind of do what you say. An interesting wrinkle on this, though, is I don't know if you've been following this, but the American Chamber of Commerce is now threatening to potentially leverage a lawsuit against the Trump administration. And what I think is going on there is company leaders, when I talk to them in private, like they're tearing their hair out. This is a very difficult situation for them and their people, but they don't want to take, you know, they don't want to put a target on their back with the Trump administration because of these power dynamics. But if I can get my industry association to do it for me, then I don't have to be the one taking the heat.
Yeah, which may explain why Congress has been so muted on all this. But international companies have to adjust their strategies in response to all of this. And it's certainly shaping up to be a huge setback for a number of entities. You talked about the car industry, but why do we not hear more from the elected leaders of this country? Clearly they have 401ks. Clearly they have children who are trying to buy a house at some point. It baffles a lot of people.
Well, you know, I think it is power dynamics. It's that if you just stick with the herd, right, you don't get singled out. If you get singled out, then this administration has shown it has very little compunction about going after individuals and individual companies, and in my case, individual institutions.
Yeah, Rita McGrath, we can't thank you enough for your insight, and it's tough to argue with anything you said. Thank you very much for your time.
It's a pleasure.